Okay, so problem two says draw the graph of y equals 2 cosine of 2x from x equals 0 to x equals 2 pi. So essentially on our screen, I graphed two different functions for us. I'm graphing each function from 0 to 2 pi because that will be the length of exactly one cycle for each of these graphs. And you have a amplitude or frequency of from -1 to 1. Basically, -1 is the minimum, 1 is the maximum. And the way that the pattern works is that in the interval from 0 to 2 pi, sine and cosine will have 5 key points. The key points are when it's intersecting the x-axis and when it has a maximum and minimum values, right? So if you look at the y equals sine of x curve, I'm graphing it at angles of multiples of pi over 2, which is 90 degrees, right? So the lowest, the first one is a intercept. The second point is a max. The third point is an intercept. The fourth point is a minimum. And the last point is an intercept. So most of the time they will fall in that pattern. Intercept, max, intercept, min, intercept. On the other hand, cosine from 0 to 2 pi, the 5 key points happen all at multiples of pi over 2 or 90 degrees, but it's a little bit different. From 0 to pi is where it's decreasing. So we begin with a maximum value, then a minimum, followed by not minimum, an intercept, then a minimum, then intercept, then maximum. All right. So you can follow like this little pattern just to help you out with making these graphs. Okay. Now, to make your graph, two things that you need to include: the amplitude and the period, the length of each cycle. So for the amplitude, a the amplitude is always equal to the absolute value of a. So the absolute value in our example here is going to be 2, right? So if you take the absolute value of 2, you're going to get 2. But more importantly, this gives you the range for your graph. The range means that the lowest value for the cosine curve will be -2, and the highest value that it will be is +2. Another thing that you can get is the value of the length of each cycle, which we call the period. The formula says you take 2 pi divided by b. The value of b in this problem is also going to be 2, right? Because it's the coefficient of the x, right? So this was my a, this was my b, so that way we don't get confused, okay? Like on which one of the twos was a and which one was b. So again, since b is 2, we get 2 pi over 2, which is now pi. So with the period being pi, this indicates a couple of things for me. This means that the first cycle is going to be from 0 to 2 pi. No, not 0 to 2 pi, 0 to pi rather. And the second cycle starts immediately when the first cycle ends. So instead of for the second cycle, it will start directly at pi, and now it goes to 2 pi. There's one last thing to do, and that's just using this one more formula. If I take the period, which was pi, and divide it by 4, it gives us pi over 4. Pi over 4 is what I'm going to use to scale the x-axis. So my x-axis, I'll start with 0, and then I'm going to go up by increments of pi over 4, okay? So let me show you now how I do this cosine graph with all the information that I have on the screen, right? I'm going to use the basic cosine curve, and then I'm going to use all the information that's on the bottom left. So first I draw the y-axis. Somebody asked in the chat, where did I get the 4 from? I get the 4 because that's the rule of thumb. that if you want to find the 5 key points, then you just take the cycle, whatever it is, and divide it by 4. And you'll see that you'll have essentially 5 points. I'll show you after I finish this example what I mean by that. So here's y, here's x. Okay, so here's the origin. I'm scaling the y-axis, so the maximum value that it can be is 2, the minimum value is -2. On the x-axis, I'm going to go by increments of pi over 4, starting with 0. So we have 0, followed by pi over 4, followed by 2 pi over 4, followed by 3 pi over 4, followed by 4 pi over 4. So you can make a mental note that 4 pi over 4 is going to be indeed pi. So that would be the first cycle. The first cycle starts from 0, ends at 4 pi over 4. Okay, now we continue the trend. We add multiples of pi over 4, so we get 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4, and then lastly 8 pi over 4. 8 pi over 4 is just simply 2 pi. So that would be your second cycle. Second cycle goes from 4 pi over 4, or pi, to 8 pi over 4, which is your 2 pi. All right. Now, everybody just got to follow the trend for cosine. The trend is you begin with a maximum, then you go to an intercept, minimum, intercept, maximum, and you repeat it for the second cycle. Right? So again, it's maximum, minimum, intercept, followed by minimum, followed by a intercept again, and then a maximum. And you connect those points with a smooth curve. So that's your first cycle. You just got to repeat the process now again for the second cycle. For the second cycle, you're starting with the maximum, right? So you're starting here again. Now you do an intercept, then you do a minimum, then a intercept again, followed by a maximum. So when you connect those points with a smooth curve, you can now see that you have 2 repetitive curves. Now, it wasn't drawn too much to scale. My thing looks a little rigid there instead of smooth, which is not good, but nonetheless, that is my graph. Okay, this is now the graph of y equals 2 cosine 2x. Somebody asked a good question earlier in the chat. They said, where did this 4 came from? Well, it's the rule of thumb. I call it the rule of thumb because think about it this way. When you look at the characteristics of sine of x and cosine of x, I said that there's 5 key points, right? So if I drew, let's say, this number line on the bottom here, just give it a moment. If I cut this into 4 equal parts, right? Let's say, okay, here's my starting, here's my ending, and I cut it into 4 equal parts. Let's say 1, 2, 3, and now 4, right? Now, this was clearly not equal parts. It was pretty horrible. But let's say that now you have the 4 parts. With loss of generality, let's just say that's equal. What you can see is that you have 4 points now. Here's the beginning point. Here's your second point. Here's the third point, fourth, and lastly, the 5th point. So that's why you divide by 4. You divide by 4 because that's how you get the 5 key points.